The cardboard box felt heavier than it should have, as Victoria Sterling walked through the rain-soaked streets of downtown Chicago. 8 months of her life reduced to a coffee mug, a wilted plant, and a photo of her late mother. The irony wasn't lost on her that she shared a surname with the corporation that had just cost her everything. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Ruby, her roommate and former colleague at Hayes Technologies. Victoria ignored them all. She couldn't face explaining how one misplaced decimal point had destroyed not just her career, but something deeper she'd been foolish enough to nurture. The memory of Sebastian Hayes' cold dismissal played on repeat in her mind. The way he'd looked at her like she was nothing more than a malfunctioning piece of equipment to be discarded. For 8 months, she'd glimpsed something human beneath. His ruthless exterior, late nights when he'd brought her coffee, moments when his mask slipped and she'd seen vulnerability in those piercing green eyes. She'd been an idiot to think it meant anything. Victoria's heels splashed through puddles as she made her way to the subway station. The city moved around her in a blur of umbrellas and hurried footsteps. Everyone had somewhere to be, something important to do, everyone except her. At 26, she was unemployed, heartbroken, and completely lost. The train car was nearly empty at this hour. Victoria slumped into a plastic seat, finally allowing the tears she'd held back all day to fall. Her reflection in the dark window showed a woman she barely recognized. Defeated, broken. But as the train pulled away from the glittering towers of the financial district, something shifted inside her chest. The pain was still there, raw and sharp, but underneath it, something else began to stir. Anger. Not just at Sebastian, but at herself. For caring too much. For allowing herself to become small in his presence. For accepting his impossible standards as normal. For 8 months, she'd bent herself into whatever shape he needed. And the moment she showed a crack of humanity, he'd thrown her away. Victoria pulled out her phone and finally read Ruby's messages. Concern, outrage, offers of help. But one message stood out from her friend Miguel, who worked in venture capital. Heard what happened? Coffee tomorrow? I have an idea that might interest you.
Ow!
Victoria stared at the message for a long moment. Then, for the first time in hours, she felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. Maybe this wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was just the beginning. She typed back quickly. Yes, and Miguel, I'm ready to burn some bridges. The train plunged into the tunnel, carrying her away from everything she'd known and towards something she couldn't yet imagine. In the darkness of the underground, Victoria Sterling began to plan her resurrection. 20 floors above the street, Sebastian Hayes stood at his office window, watching the rain streak down the glass. The Sterling Corporation contract lay signed. On his desk, worth $50 million? It's a triumph by any measure. So why did victory taste like ash in his mouth? 3 months later, Victoria sat across from potential investors in a gleaming conference room that rivaled any at Hayes Technologies. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the polished presentation materials spread across the mahogany table. Sterling Solutions, she said, her voice steady and confident. We specialize in identifying and preventing the exact kind of operational failures that cost companies millions. The irony was intentional. Every slide in her presentation was a masterclass in precision, every number triple-checked, every projection conservative yet compelling. She'd learned from her mistake, but more importantly, she'd learned from Sebastian's ruthless perfectionism. Miguel sat beside her, his venture capital credentials lending weight to her pitch. But Victoria knew the real selling point was her story. The assistant who'd been fired for a single error and had turned that experience into a revolutionary business model. How do you identify these potential failures? Asked Jennifer Walsh, a senior partner at Meridian Investments. Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. I know exactly what to look for because I've lived through the consequences. Every company has blind spots, pressure points where even excellent employees can crack. I help businesses identify and eliminate those vulnerabilities before they become catastrophic. The questions came fast and challenging, but Victoria was ready for all of them. She'd spent 3 months preparing for this moment, working 8 days, surviving on determination and the burning need to prove Sebastian Hayes wrong. "We're prepared to offer you initial funding of $2 million, Jennifer said finally, contingent on one condition. Victoria's pulse quickened, which is, we want you to pitch to 3 major corporations as test cases. Prove your methodology works at scale. Jennifer's eyes gleamed with interest. We have some companies in mind, including Hayes Technologies. The conference room fell silent. Victoria felt her carefully constructed composure waver for just a moment. Miguel shot her a concerned glance, but she recovered quickly. That would be perfect, she said, her voice betraying nothing of the storm raging inside her. I'd welcome the opportunity to show Hayes Technologies what they're missing. 2 hours later, Victoria stood on the sidewalk outside the investment firm, contract in hand. Ruby appeared beside her, having waited in the lobby during the entire presentation. You did it? Ruby breathed, her eyes wide with amazement. You actually did it? Victoria looked up at the towering glass buildings around them, each one representing power, success, the kind of influence she'd once thought was beyond her reach. Now she had her own small piece of it. This is just the beginning, she said quietly. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Victoria's breath caught. When she read it, congratulations on the funding. Heard through industry contacts. You always were resourceful. Victoria stared at the message, her fingers tightening around the phone. Sebastian had been keeping tabs on her. Part of her wanted to delete the message and pretend she'd never received it. But another part, the part that had been growing stronger, every day since her termination, had a different idea. She typed back quickly. Thank you. I learned from the best. See you soon. Then she deleted his contact information and slipped the phone back into her purse. When she faced Sebastian Hayes again, it would be as an equal. No, more than an equal. It would be as his competition. Come on, she said to Ruby, linking their arms. We have a company to build. Gas. As they walked away, Victoria didn't see the figure watching from a window 42 floors above. Sebastian Hayes stood motionless, his hand pressed against the glass, wondering what he had unleashed. And for the first time in months, he felt something other than emptiness. He felt afraid. The elevator in Hayes Technologies still made the same soft chime when it reached the 42nd floor. Victoria stepped out, her burgundy blazer pristine, her briefcase containing enough ammunition to reshape Sebastian's entire operation. 6 months had transformed her from a discarded assistant into a formidable opponent. The familiar marble floors clicked beneath her heels, but everything else had changed. She was no longer the woman who'd begged for a second chance. She was Sterling Solutions, and she was here to collect a debt. Miss Sterling, the new assistant stammered, clearly flustered. Mr. Hayes is expecting you. Victoria nodded, amused by the reversal. She was the one being announced, the one whose arrival commanded attention. The assistant, barely out of college, fumbled with papers and nearly dropped the phone. Victoria recognized the signs of working under Sebastian's impossible pressure. The corner office door opened, and there he was. Sebastian Hayes looked exactly the same, tall frame filling the doorway, those piercing green eyes assessing her. With the same intensity she remembered, but Victoria was no longer the woman who'd melted under that gaze. She met his stare evenly, noting the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers gripped the doorframe just a fraction too tightly. Victoria? His voice was carefully neutral. You look well. I am well. She stepped into his office without invitation, her movements confident and deliberate. Success suits me. The office was unchanged, the same mahogany desk, the same view of the city sprawling below. Victoria no longer felt small in this space. If anything, it seemed smaller than she remembered. Congratulations on Sterling Solutions, Sebastian said, closing the door behind them. $2 million in funding is impressive for such a young company. Victoria set her briefcase on his desk, the same desk where she'd once placed his morning coffee and organized his impossible schedule. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're not held back by someone else's limitations. Something flickered in Sebastian's eyes. Hurt, maybe, or anger. Victoria found she didn't care which. I assume this isn't a social call, he said, moving to his chair, but not sitting. The power dynamic was different now, and they both knew it. Meridian Investments has asked me to conduct an operational efficiency audit of Hayes Technologies, Victoria said, opening her briefcase with practiced precision. I'm here to schedule preliminary interviews with your senior staff. Sebastian's mask slipped for just a moment. You're auditing us? I'm offering my services to help you identify operational vulnerabilities before they become catastrophic failures. Victoria's smile was sharp as winter. Isn't that what good business partners do? The silence stretched between them, charged. With unspoken history, Victoria watched Sebastian process the implications. She wasn't just back in his office. She was here in a position of power, backed by serious investors. With the authority to examine every aspect of his operation. And if I refuse? He asked quietly. Then Meridian withdraws their consideration for the expansion loan you've been courting. Victoria's voice was silk over steel, very interested in working with companies that embrace innovative efficiency. Solutions. Sebastian laughed, but there was no humor in it. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. He moved to the window, his back to her. You've maneuvered me into a corner. I learned from the best, Victoria replied, echoing her text from months ago. When Sebastian turned back to face her, his expression was unreadable. How long do you need? 2 weeks. Full access to personnel files, financial records, operational procedures. Victoria pulled out a contract already prepared. Standard consulting agreement. I think you'll find the terms fair. Sebastian approached the desk. For a moment, they were close enough that Victoria could smell his familiar cologne, could see the faint lines of stress around his eyes that hadn't been there when she'd worked for him. She forced herself to remain unmoved, picked up the contract, scanning it with the same meticulous attention he'd once demanded from her work. This is very thorough. I don't make mistakes anymore, Victoria said quietly. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat. The careful masks they both wore slipped. Victoria saw something raw and complicated in Sebastian's gaze, something that made her chest tighten with memories she'd tried to bury. Then the moment passed. Sebastian signed the contract with firm, decisive strokes. Welcome back to Hayes Technologies, Miss Sterling, he said, extending the signed document to her. Victoria took it, their fingers brushing for just an instant. The contact sent an unwelcome jolt through her system, a reminder of feelings she'd thought were dead and buried. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, she replied formally. I'll start Monday morning. Trust you'll inform your staff to cooperate fully. Of course, Sebastian's voice was steady, professional. Is there anything else you need? Victoria closed her briefcase, the sound sharp in the quiet office. It's just one thing. When I'm done here, you'll understand exactly what it feels like to have your world turned upside down by someone else's judgment. She walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Oh, and Sebastian. This time, I won't be the one begging for a second chance. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Sebastian alone with the contract and the lingering scent of her perfume. For the first time in months, he smiled. It was going to be an interesting 2 weeks. Day 10 of the audit arrived like a storm breaking. Victoria sat in the conference room she'd commandeered, surrounded by damning evidence of Sebastian's operational failures. Not the small human errors she'd once made, but systemic problems. That had cost the company millions in lost opportunities and damaged relationships. The files spread across the table told a story Sebastian didn't want revealed. 3 major clients lost due to his impossible standards, driving away talented staff. A sexual harassment complaint that had been quietly settled rather than addressed. Budget overruns on projects where his perfectionism had paralyzed decision-making. Victoria's phone buzzed. Text from Jennifer Walsh at Meridian. How bad is it? She typed back. Worse than we thought? Full report ready for presentation tomorrow. The conference room door opened without a knock. Sebastian entered, his usual composure cracked around the edges. He'd been avoiding her for days, communicating. Only through his new assistant, but Victoria had known this confrontation was inevitable. Working late again, he observed, closing the door behind him. The office was empty except for security, the floor eerily quiet. Some habits die hard. Victoria didn't look up from her laptop, though I suppose you'd know all about destructive patterns. Sebastian moved closer, and Victoria caught the scent of whiskey on his breath. He was not drunk, but not entirely sober either. This was a Sebastian she'd never seen before, the careful control finally beginning to fray. "Found what you were looking for?" he asked, gesturing at the files. "More than I was looking for." Victoria finally looked at him, noting the stubble on his jaw, the wrinkled shirt that suggested he'd slept in his office. "Did you know that 17 employees have left in the past 6 months? All citing work environment issues?" "People leave? It's business." "Sarah Chen from marketing left after you made her redo a campaign 8 times for a client meeting that was ultimately canceled." Victoria pulled out a resignation letter. "She's now working for our biggest competitor." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Who's meeting standards?" "Whose standards, Sebastian? Yours or realities?" Victoria stood, moving around the table to face him directly. "Marcus Rodriguez in accounting requested a transfer after you publicly humiliated him for questioning a budget allocation." He was right, by the way. That project went 15% over budget. You don't understand the pressure of running a company like this, don't I? Victoria's voice rose, months of controlled anger finally breaking free. "I worked beside you for 8 months. I saw how you treated people like disposable resources. I thought I was different because you brought me coffee sometimes, because you almost smiled at my jokes. But I was just another cog in your machine, until I stopped working perfectly." Sebastian stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "You think you know everything about me? About what it takes to build something from nothing? I know enough." Victoria held her ground, even though being this close to him sent her pulse racing. "I know you'd rather destroy something beautiful than risk showing vulnerability. I know you use fear to motivate people because you're terrified of genuine connection. And what about you?" Sebastian's voice was rough, dangerous. "You came back here for revenge, not justice. You want to tear down everything I've built because I hurt your feelings? My feelings?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "You think this is about hurt feelings? Sebastian, you didn't just fire me. You made me believe I was worthless. You took 8 months of dedication and threw it away like garbage because of one mistake." "It wasn't about the mistake." The words came out raw, unguarded. Sebastian immediately looked like he regretted them. Victoria went very still. "What?" Sebastian turned away, running his hands through his hair. The mistake was just an excuse. An excuse for what? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. When Sebastian finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You were getting too close. I was starting to depend on you in ways that had nothing to do with work. I'd look forward to your smile in the morning, find reasons to keep you working late just so I wouldn't have to be alone in this office." He turned back to face her, his mask completely gone. "I was falling for my assistant, and that terrified me more than any business failure ever could." Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "So you destroyed me instead." "I destroyed us both." Sebastian's laugh was hollow. "Do you think I've had a single good day since you left? Do you think replacing you was even possible? I've been through 4 assistants, and none of them lasted more than a month because I kept comparing them to you." The vulnerability in his voice undid something inside Victoria's chest. All her carefully constructed anger began to crumble, revealing the pain she'd been hiding underneath. "You hurt me," she whispered. "You made me feel like I was nothing. You were everything." Sebastian took a step toward her, his eyes desperate. "You were everything, and that's why I had to make you leave. Because caring about you that much meant I was weak, and weak men don't build empires. Weak men don't build anything worth having." Victoria shot back. "Strong men know that power shared is power multiplied." They were standing close enough now that Victoria could see the gold flecks in Sebastian's green eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. The air between them crackled with months of suppressed emotion. "Victoria," he said softly, his hand reaching toward her face. She stepped back, the spell breaking.
"Ow."
"You don't get to touch me. You don't get to stand here and tell me you cared about me after you threw me away like garbage." "Then what do you want?" Sebastian's voice cracked. "What will it take for you to forgive me?" Victoria looked at him for a long moment, this powerful man reduced to pleading in an empty office. Part of her wanted to reach for him, to close the distance between them, and pretend the last 9 months had been a nightmare they could both wake up from. Instead, she gathered her files and slipped them into her briefcase. "I want you to feel what I felt," she said quietly. "I want you to understand what it's like to lose everything because someone else decided you weren't worth keeping." She walked to the door, then paused without turning around. "Tomorrow Meridian will receive my full report. Your operational failures, your management problems, your complete inability to retain talent. They'll withdraw their support for your expansion loan and probably recommend that their other portfolio companies avoid partnerships with Hayes Technologies." Victoria Sebastian's voice was broken. "You taught me that business isn't personal, Sebastian. Consider this my final lesson." The door closed behind her, leaving Sebastian alone with the wreckage of everything he'd built and everything he'd destroyed. Outside the building, Victoria finally allowed herself to cry, not from sadness, but from the terrible, hollow victory of watching a man she'd once loved realize exactly what he'd lost. 6 weeks after Victoria's report destroyed Sebastian's expansion plans, she stood in her new office, overlooking Lake Michigan. Sterling Solutions had exploded into success, with 3 major contracts and a team of 12 brilliant consultants, who shared her vision of business built on respect rather than fear. The morning news played softly in the background as she reviewed proposals for their European expansion. Victoria had learned to savor these quiet moments before the day's chaos. "Victoria, you need to see this." Ruby burst through the door, tablet in hand, her face a mixture of shock and concern. Victoria looked up from her papers, immediately alert. Ruby only used that tone for genuine emergencies. "It's about Sebastian," Ruby said, handing over the tablet. "He's selling Hayes Technologies." The financial news headline made Victoria's blood freeze. Tech CEO Sebastian Hayes announces sale of Empire. Cites personal restructuring. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the article. Sebastian was liquidating everything, selling to his biggest competitor for a fraction of what the company was worth 6 months ago. Hundreds of employees would be laid off. Decades of work gone. "There's more," Ruby said softly. "Miguel called this morning. Sebastian's been trying to reach you. It's left 17 messages with different people, trying to get your contact information." Victoria set down the tablet, her mind racing. She'd wanted Sebastian to understand loss, but this was total destruction. This wasn't justice, it was annihilation. "He's also started a foundation," Ruby continued, reading from her phone. "It's a Sterling Foundation for Professional Development. Provides grants and mentorship for employees who've been unfairly terminated." The name hit Victoria like a physical blow. He'd named it after her. "There's going to be a press conference this afternoon," Ruby said gently. "He's announcing the sale and the foundation launch." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of unintended consequences. She'd set out to teach Sebastian a lesson about treating people with respect. But instead, she'd triggered a complete meltdown that would hurt hundreds of innocent employees. "I need to see the press conference," she said quietly. 3 hours later, Victoria sat in her car outside the Hayes Technologies building, watching the news trucks and reporters gather. She'd told herself she was just curious, but the truth was more complicated. Seeing Sebastian's empire crumble should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like watching someone drown. The press conference began at 4 o'clock sharp. Victoria watched on her phone as Sebastian emerged from the building, looking older than his 32 years. His usual perfect suit was replaced by simple dark clothing, and there was something different in his posture. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sebastian began, his voice steady but lacking its former commanding presence. "I'm here to announce that I've agreed to sell Hayes Technologies to Morrison Corp., effective immediately." The questions came fast and harsh. Why was he selling at such a loss? What about the employees? What were his future plans? Sebastian answered each question with quiet dignity, taking full responsibility for the company's struggles. Spoke about operational failures, about the toxic culture he'd created. It's about learning too late that sustainable success required treating people as human beings rather than resources. "The Sterling Foundation," he said when asked about his new venture, "will focus on supporting professionals who have been unfairly dismissed or undervalued in their careers. We'll provide grants, legal support, and mentorship to help them rebuild and thrive. A reporter's voice cut through the crowd. The foundation is named after Victoria Sterling,
the consultant,
whose report preceded your company's decline. Any comment on the connection? Victoria held her breath, waiting for Sebastian's response. Victoria Sterling is the most remarkable person I've ever known, Sebastian said, his voice carrying across the crowd. Now, she's brilliant, resilient, and possesses an integrity I spent years trying to break instead of celebrating. This foundation exists because she taught me that power without compassion is just destruction in an expensive suit. He paused, looking directly into the camera. Victoria, if you're watching this, I want you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. Not firing you was the mistake. The mistake was never telling you how much you meant to me when I had the chance. The press conference continued, but Victoria had stopped listening. She sat in her car, tears streaming down her face, as the full complexity of the situation crashed over her. Sebastian hadn't just learned her lesson, he'd internalized it so completely that he'd chosen to destroy his life's work rather than continue perpetuating a system that hurt people. Her phone rang. Miguel's name appeared on the screen. Vic, you need to know something, he said without preamble. Sebastian's been liquidating his personal assets too. His penthouse, his cars, his art collection. He's moving everything into the foundation. What? Do you mean everything? I mean, he's keeping enough to rent a small apartment and is putting the rest toward helping people rebuild their careers after workplace trauma? He's essentially making himself poor to fund this thing, Victoria ended. The call and sat in silence, watching as the press conference concluded and Sebastian disappeared back into the building. The man who'd once valued power above everything had voluntarily given up both wealth and influence to create something meaningful. The irony was devastating. She'd wanted to teach him about loss, and he'd learned so completely that he'd chosen to lose everything rather than continue being the man who'd hurt her. Victoria started her car and drove toward the building. She didn't have a plan, didn't know what she would say, but she knew she couldn't let this story end with Sebastian's destruction. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like traveling through time. When the doors opened, Victoria saw Sebastian alone in his empty office, packing the last of his personal items into a single cardboard box. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. You came, he said finally, his voice soft with surprise. I watched the press conference. Victoria stepped into the office, noting how different it looked, stripped of all its power symbols. You named the foundation after me. It seemed appropriate. You're the one who taught me that business should build people up, not tear them down. Sebastian closed the box and sat on the edge of his desk. I know you probably think this is some grand gesture to win you back, but it's not. This is me finally becoming the man I should have been all along. Victoria moved closer, studying his face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something deeper and more genuine. You're really giving up everything. Not everything. I'm keeping the most important thing I learned. Sebastian's eyes met hers. That you can't build something meaningful by destroying the people around you. That power shared is power multiplied, as someone very wise once told me. The silence stretched between them. But it was different now. It's not charged with anger or unresolved tension, but with possibility. I'm sorry, Victoria said quietly. I wanted you to learn a lesson, not destroy your life. You didn't destroy anything, Victoria. You saved me from destroying myself. Sebastian stood, moving toward her. The question is, what happens now? Victoria looked around the empty office, and back at the man who'd once seemed larger than life and now appeared beautifully, imperfectly human. Now she smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given him in almost a year. Now you show me your business plan for the foundation? Because if you're going to help people rebuild their careers, you're going to need someone who knows exactly what that feels like. Sebastian's eyes widened. Are you offering to work with me? I'm offering to be your partner.
Nice.
Equal partners this time, building something that matters. Victoria extended her hand to him. What do you say, Mr. Hayes? Ready? To learn what it really means to build an empire? Sebastian looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment, then took it in both of his. His touch was warm, steady, completely different from the cold professionalism of their past. "Can't promise I won't make mistakes," he said. "Can't promise I won't call you out when you do," Victoria replied. "Deal." As their hands clasped, Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. Not the desperate longing of her assistant days, but something stronger and more sustainable. This was what partnership looked like. This was what it meant to rise from ashes, not just surviving, but transformed. 6 months later, Sterling Hayes' foundation had helped over 200 professionals restart their careers. Victoria and Sebastian worked side by side, building something unprecedented in their industry. They fought, they disagreed, they challenged each other daily. And slowly, carefully, they fell in love with the people they'd become. On a rainy Thursday evening, as they worked late in their modest office space, Sebastian looked up from his laptop. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "It's giving up Sterling Solutions to build this with me." Victoria smiled, reaching across their shared desk to touch his hand. "I learned something important about myself through all of this. I'm not interested in building something alone anymore. I want to build something with someone who sees partnership as strength, not weakness. Even if that someone once broke your heart, especially then, because now I know he's learned how to put it back together." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean. Inside, two people who'd once destroyed each other worked side by side, building something beautiful from the ashes of what they'd lost. Victoria Sterling had set out to teach Sebastian Hayes about power and loss. Instead, they'd taught each other about forgiveness and the kind of love that makes people better than they ever imagined they could be. The end asterisk. Like this video, if the story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love, and let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.